To add to the flavors of Dhandho, let's examine my own Dhandho experience. When I founded my first business, TransTech Inc., I had virtually no money. There was about $30,000 in my 401k retirement account at Tell Labs and $70,000 available in credit card limits on a number of credit cards that I signed up for in anticipation of starting my business. I researched U.S. bankruptcy laws and found that they were not too onerous. If the business went south and I was unable to cover my debts, I could declare personal bankruptcy and start over. It was a very similar situation to Papa Patel. There wasn't much downside because there wasn't much to lose. Also, when I resigned, my boss told me that they'd love to have me back any time, and they were likely to give me a decent raise as well. All I had to lose was the $30,000 in my 401k retirement account. I was all of 25 years old. The last thing I was concerned about was depleting my retirement assets. I incorporated TransTech in February 1990 while continuing to work at Tell Labs. I took half days off as vacation time whenever I had client sales calls. I used to work on the business at home in the morning from 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., be at work during the day, and again work on the business in the evening from 6 p.m. to midnight. I had a paycheck coming in and very little in the way of business expenses. When I had the first client and revenues over $200,000 a year in the bag, I resigned. If you look at the approach taken, it was a zero-risk approach. The only downside I had was the possible loss of my paltry $30,000 in 401k assets. The upside was enormous, easily several $1 million. Visa and MasterCard were my venture capitalists funding the rest of it. I was single at the time. There was no family to worry about. Many lunches and dinners back then were comprised of a simple Subway sandwich. My expenses were pretty low. I considered staying at Tell Labs to be a risky proposition. I thought that if I just stayed at the company, it was likely to be a boring and slow corporate path. If I woke up when I was 35 or 45 and decided to go off on my own, it would be much more complicated. I would likely have a wife and kids by then, which would make it harder to break loose and make a risk-free bet. Being 25 and single, I had available at least one risk-free bet. My game plan was very simple. I had an arbitrage-based business model. The value proposition was leveraging India's deep expertise in available talent in client-server computing to satisfy the deep shortage of talent in the Midwestern United States. I had $100,000 of capital available to me, and the business was already producing revenue and some profit when I resigned from Tell Labs. I knew that with the first 2 customers on board, generating real revenue and profits, the downside was very limited. It was classic, heads I win, tails I don't lose much. TransTech scaled nicely. In 1996, we were recognized as an Inc. 500 company, one of the 500 fastest-growing businesses in the United States. As revenues went from nothing to over $20 million annually in 10 years, the business never took a dime of outside capital. Cash flows provided all the growth capital and then some. Cash was always very tight as we were growing very rapidly and reinvesting all available capital to scale. In late 1991, I found a terrific banker, Tom Harazim, who liked our story. He paid off all my credit cards, got us off the very expensive factoring of receivables I was doing to bring in cash as quickly as possible, and got TransTech set up with a hugely cheaper line of credit based on our pristine receivables. We did a sale of some assets for about $2 million in 1994, which made me feel rich for the first time, and then the entire business was sold in 2000 for several $1 million. A $30,000 investment got me more than 150 times return over 10 years, an annualized return of well over 65%. I went from a salary of $45,000 a year, when I quit my job, to consistently having a salary of over $300,000 a year in a few years. The magic word is Dhandho, baby. Huge upside with virtually no downside. It was a classic, heads I win, tails I don't lose much kind of bet.